today. Now, I am going to bring you some breaking news quickly, and we are hearing that Ian Brady has died. I believe that we are joined on the phone now by Sky's Nick Martin. If you can hear me, Nick, what more can you tell us?
Well, we did know, Sophie, that Ian Brady was ill. We knew in the last 24 hours that he was receiving what was being called end-of-life care by nurses at Ashworth Psychiatric Hospital, where he's been for the last 20 years. And that hospital trust up in Merseyside have just confirmed in a statement the death of Ian Brady, of course, the child killer, the psychopath, convicted in the 1960s alongside his accomplice Myra Hindley of the murders of children in the Yorkshire and Manchester area. I've got a statement in front of me now from Mersey Care, who say a Mersey Care NHS Foundation spokesman said, "We can confirm a 79-year-old patient, that is, we now understand is Ian Brady, in long-term care at Ashworth High Security Hospital, has died after becoming physically unwell." Now, we know that since about 1999, Ian Brady was on hunger strike and was being force-fed via a tube. In 2013, he actually went to a mental health tribunal to claim that he wasn't mentally ill and that he should be allowed to starve himself to death. He lost that tribunal, and ever since then, his physical well-being, his health has gone down. We heard about 24 hours ago, as I say, that his health had deteriorated. Now, earlier today, I spoke to Terry Kilbride, who is the brother of John Kilbride, one of Brady's victims, and he was saying that for many years Ian Brady was the master manipulator, always from his prison, from his hospital cell, trying to manipulate in the media and in the press and through letters to journalists, including myself. I received 5 letters from Ian Brady over the last 15 years. And he was saying today, when Ian Brady dies, he said it will be a relief to him and the families of those who were affected. The victims, of course, Pauline Reed, John Kilbride, and of course, that very famous picture of a young bespectacled boy who was taken from the streets of Oldham in the 1960s, who was never found. That boy, Keith Bennett, his mother, famously, Winnie Johnson, devoted her whole life to begging Ian Brady to reveal where he had buried her son. Of course, he never did that. He always claimed he remembered where he buried young Keith Bennett on Saddleworth Moor, just overlooking Manchester, but never ever revealed to her the location of her son's body. In 2012, she sadly died, not knowing the fate of her son. Of course, very famously, he was convicted with Myra Hindley, of course, who served a life sentence. Home Secretary after Home Secretary was under pressure to keep her in prison. She died in the early 2000s. And Ian Brady had written letters wishing that he could follow in her footsteps, wishing that he could die in prison, but became very ill. He was being force-fed, as I say. But tonight, the hospital trust up in Merseyside, the psychiatric hospital, have confirmed to us that Ian Brady, the child killer, notorious British serial killer, has died this evening. We understand he had emphysema. He was
Good evening. The Moors murderer Ian Brady has died. He and Myra Hindley shocked the world with their crimes in the 1960s, sexually assaulting and murdering 5 children and burying their bodies on Saddleworth Moor. Ashworth High Security Mental Hospital on Merseyside tonight confirmed that Brady had died after a long illness. Well, our reporter Ian Haslam is here. Ian, what more do we know?
Well, Becky, this news started coming into us in the last half hour and was confirmed in the last few minutes by a spokesperson from Mersey Care NHS Foundation Trust. He was being held, Ian Brady, at Ashworth Hospital, a secure psychiatric unit on Merseyside. Tonight, a spokesman said, "We can confirm A 79-year-old patient in long-term care has died after becoming physically unwell. We do know that the serial killer had been ill for some time and was receiving palliative care by specially trained nurses. Brady is, of course, along with Myra Hindley, one of the most notorious killers in criminal history. He and Hindley, who died in prison in 2002, tortured and murdered 5 children in the 1960s, 4 of whom were buried on Saddleworth Moor near Oldham. They were jailed over the killings of John Kilbride, Leslie Ann Downey and Edward Evans in 1966. They later admitted the murders of Pauline Reed and Keith Bennett. Brady constantly refused to reveal the location of Keith Bennett's remains.
Now, in the years leading up to his death, Ian Brady had campaigned to be moved from Ashworth to another site in Scotland where he wouldn't be force-fed and could be allowed to die if he so wished. That's right, isn't it?
Yeah, he's been on successive hunger strikes since way back in 1999, arguing he should be allowed to die, but was force-fed because he was considered to be mentally ill. Now, he refused to take part in a further review of his case last year after it was ruled that his solicitor couldn't be involved. His legal challenge to that ban was then rejected in February. At that point, his legal team said he'd been bedridden for the last few years with emphysema, but then came the news over the weekend that Brady was gravely ill, with the news tonight that he's died at the age of 79. We will, of course, have more on this in our bulletins throughout the day and in North West Tonight at 6:30.
OK, Ian, thanks very much for that.
In the last few minutes, it's been announced that the Moors murderer Ian Brady's died. Brady and his then-girlfriend Myra Hindley sexually tortured and murdered 5 children between 1963 and 1965. The couple buried at least 4 of the bodies on Saddleworth Moor near Oldham. Brady died at Ashworth Psychiatric Hospital on Merseyside. He takes to his grave the location of one of his victims, 12-year-old Keith Bennett, has never been found despite desperate pleas from the boy's relatives for Brady to reveal his burial site. Well, we're joined now by the former police officer Norman Brennan, who represents the victims. This has just broken in the last few minutes, Norman Brennan, so give us your first thoughts.
Well, my first thoughts are that these 2 individuals, Myra Hindley and Ian Brady, they murdered 5 young children, one of whom was Leslie Ann Downey, whose family I represented for many years. And when they murdered her, she was only 10 years of age. She was lost on the moors, and they recorded what they actually did to her. I remember staying with Anne West and Alan, her mother and father, a number of times, and I met them dozens of times. And the grief and torment that I saw in their faces was beyond probably many that I'd actually met. I've met hundreds of families that had somebody murdered, and it's always dreadful. There's never a nice way for anyone to be murdered. But to know that your daughter was lost, alone, and murdered, and then actually her death was recorded, the grief can never, ever be etched from your mind. And those 2 individuals, Myra Hindley and Ian Brady, they didn't just destroy 5 young children's lives. For their relentless appeals and false hopes that they gave the families for over 50 years, destroyed all of the families as well, even to this day.
He never released the burial site of Keith Bennett, and that family never recovered. Keith's mum went to her grave tormented in the way that you describe, having begged him many times. Do you understand that mentality?
Well, they both had serious psychological issues, and they then played mind games with the media. And as you rightly say, Keith Bennett did. I remember Winnie, and I met the other families as well. And when you saw them on the television, you could only imagine the torment. You know, when we get up and we've had bad days, we hope the next day will be better. Well, when you've had somebody murdered, certainly in the circumstances that Myra Hindley and Ian Brady murdered them, that is torture that exists 24/7, and you can never comprehend it. I sometimes try to comprehend how these families exist, and when I look in their faces, I just see an emptiness. And with every murder, time stops and life changes. And for all the victims of Myra Hindley and Ian Brady, life changed forever. They had a life sentence for over 50 years, and today I don't know if it's going to bring closure to anybody, because sadly many of the families, actual parents have died too.
Norman, you raise a really interesting point when you talk about psychological issues, because this case caused something of a sort of complication in the public mind, this idea of mental ill health versus pure evil. There were people who said they weren't mentally ill, this was just pure evil.
You're right. You're absolutely right there. I've described Myra Hindley and Ian Brady of two of the most evil people I've ever met, and they are evil beyond belief. And maybe the pair of them tried to fool the prison authorities with their mind games by playing mind games about, their state of mind at the time that they actually committed those murders. And not everybody that commits a murder is psychiatrically ill. And probably they weren't psychiatrically ill, but they tried to convince us. And every time they tried to convince us, it just twisted that knife in the wounds of all of those families a little more. And many of them, as I say now, have died with no peace. I remember seeing Leslie Ann Downey's mother, Anne, in her coffin. And I remember looking at her body, and I looked at her face. And even in death, I saw torment on her face. And I've seen many dead bodies as a police officer. And I'll never forget that face. And I just hope that there's some respite for the families that are still alive today that have lived with over 50 years of grief and pure torment.
Norman Brennan, thank you for sharing your time with us this evening. Appreciate it.
Good evening, welcome to Granada Reports. Ian Brady is dead. The Moors murderer died tonight just under an hour ago at Ashworth Hospital on Merseyside. He was 79. He and Myra Hindley, who died in prison 15 years ago, tortured and murdered 5 children in the 1960s. 4 of their victims were buried on Saddleworth Moor. Brady was jailed in 1966 after a trial in Chester. He'd been in Ashworth for 32 years, where medical experts say he had a chronic mental illness. For the families about Brady, they said it was all about him keeping power over others. He died never revealing where the last of his victims, Keith Bennett, was buried.